The airport was alive with its usual morning energy. Bright screens flashed departure times, rolling suitcases tapped across the floor, and the gentle hum of announcements filled the air. Among the travelers walking with quiet purpose was Captain Rahim Al-Fad, a man known for his calm nature and remarkable discipline. Most people who crossed his path never suspected he held such a respected role in the Royal Guard. To strangers, he appeared as an ordinary gentleman neatly dressed, polite, and carrying himself with a peaceful confidence. Rahim had always preferred traveling without drawing attention. Even though he worked closely with the royal family and carried responsibilities that very few people understood, he chose simplicity. Today, he was flying to visit his younger sister, who lived in a nearby country. It was supposed to be a smooth, easy trip. One of those rare moments when he could relax and think quietly without the pressure of duty. His assistant had booked him a confirmed first-class seat, ensuring comfort for the long flight, and everything seemed set for a pleasant journey. He reached the check-in counter early, as he always did. He disliked rushing, and he enjoyed observing the world around him. Watching people at airports often made him smile. Some hurried, some joked with friends, some held children in their arms, and some simply stared at their phones, lost in their own thoughts. When his turn came, Rahim stepped forward with a warm smile and handed over his passport and ticket. The airline supervisor at the counter glanced at his documents and then at him. Her expression remained neutral for a moment, but something shifted subtly, almost unnoticeably, when she looked at his name. "Good morning," Rahim said politely. The supervisor nodded without returning the smile. She typed something into her computer, her eyebrows tightening. After a few seconds, she spoke in a tone that sounded firm and a little dismissive. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket," she said. "First class is full. You cannot board with this seat." Rahim was surprised but maintained his gentle expression. "There must be a misunderstanding," he replied softly. "This is a confirmed reservation." "No," the supervisor said quickly, waving her hand as if brushing aside his words. "The system shows an error. You will have to move to economy class if you want to fly today." Several passengers waiting in line turned their heads slightly. Rahim didn't like unnecessary attention, so he spoke quietly. "May I request you to check again? My ticket was booked in advance, and I believe everything should be correct." The supervisor let out a short breath, the kind that suggested annoyance rather than patience. Instead of checking, she shook her head. "Sir, I already told you, there is nothing to check. First class is full." Rahim stayed calm. He had learned long ago that patience opened more doors than frustration. "I understand," he said gently. "But could you please call a manager or recheck the reservation? It will only take a moment." This seemed to irritate her further. She gave him a quick look that held more judgment than understanding. "There's no need to call anyone," she said. "These things happen. You should be thankful you still have a seat." Her tone carried an unkind edge, the kind that made nearby passengers frown. Rahim noticed a few people watching the exchange with sympathetic eyes. They could sense something was wrong. Rahim nodded politely, still refusing to let the situation disturb his peace. He reached into a small pouch and pulled out an identification card. An official card that quietly stated his position in the Royal Guard. He never used it unless absolutely necessary, but he hoped it might help clear the confusion without creating problems for anyone. "If this helps," he said kindly, "please take a look." The supervisor glanced at the card briefly, then looked at Rahim with a doubtful expression. Instead of checking the card properly, she narrowed her eyes and gave a small, uneasy laugh. "This?" she said with an uncomfortable smile. "Anyone could print something like this. Please, don't waste my time." Her comment was loud enough for several passengers to hear, and a few of them exchanged surprised looks. Some shook their heads, wondering why she was speaking to him in such a manner. Rahim remained quiet. He had faced misunderstandings before, and he knew that reacting emotionally would only worsen the situation. Still, inside him, a small ache began to form, not because he felt insulted, but because he could sense that fairness was missing in this moment. He believed in treating everyone with respect, no matter who they were. Seeing that courtesy not returned felt disappointing. The supervisor carried on with the same tone. If you want to fly today, take the economy seat. Otherwise, you can cancel your trip. But I'm not discussing this any further. Rahim stood there, still calm. But it was clear that the situation was not moving forward. Passengers nearby whispered quietly. Some stepped closer, sensing that he was being treated unfairly. One elderly woman leaned toward him and whispered, "You should ask for someone above her. This does not seem right." For Munning, Rahim smiled gently at her in appreciation. He looked back at the supervisor one last time and spoke with steady respect. "I understand your position. Thank you for your time." He stepped away from the counter to avoid blocking the line. He did not want to cause trouble for other travelers. As he walked a few steps aside, he took a deep breath. He reminded himself, as he often did, that patience was also a form of strength. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a special phone, a secure, official device that he rarely used. It was not meant for casual communication. It was meant for moments when something required attention at the highest level, especially when it involved official dignity or national representation. Rahim hesitated for a moment. Not because he feared consequences, but because he always preferred peaceful solutions. But today, something felt different. It was not about the seat or the ticket anymore. It was about principle, about fairness, about how people deserve to be treated regardless of their background. He made a single call. Only one. His voice remained calm, steady, and respectful. As he explained the situation, in simple terms, no exaggeration, no anger, no demands. He merely reported what had happened, just as he would report any official matter. Onlookers did not understand the importance of that call. To them, it looked like a man simply contacting someone for assistance. But those who noticed his calm expression and the careful way he held the phone felt there was more than met the eye. When he ended the call, he returned the device to his pocket and waited quietly. He did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He did not look upset. He simply stood there with the same gentle dignity he arrived with. Passengers who had witnessed the incident watched him curiously. Some admired how composed he remained despite the unfair treatment. Others whispered to each other, wondering if the situation would be resolved soon. Rahim didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but he knew he had done everything in the most respectful way possible. And now, all he could do was wait. Little did anyone around him know that the simple, peaceful call he had just made would set in motion a series of events that would grow far beyond this airport, far beyond this morning, and far beyond the quiet misunderstanding at the counter. For the moment, though, Rahim stood silently among the passengers, blending in just as he always preferred, calm, thoughtful, and unaware that the world around him was about to change. The atmosphere around the gate slowly shifted after Rahim stepped aside. People continued to move through the airport, but the small crowd of passengers who had watched the earlier exchange remained quietly alert. They kept glancing from Rahim to the supervisor and back again, wondering what would happen next. Rahim, however, stayed calm, his hands loosely folded in front of him. He had learned long ago that patience carried its own strength, and he was determined not to let the moment trouble his heart. The supervisor, meanwhile, returned to her desk with an air of stubborn confidence. She seemed convinced that she had handled the situation correctly. Every now and then, she glanced at Rahim with a look that suggested she expected him to give up and leave. But Rahim didn't approach her again. He simply waited. A few minutes passed, and the tension around the counter grew. Another staff member approached the supervisor and whispered something in her ear. The supervisor waved her off lightly, as if the matter wasn't worth her time. The other staff member hesitated, looking slightly uncomfortable, then stepped back to help another passenger. Rahim remained still, watching everything with quiet observation. He didn't blame the staff or feel anger toward them. He simply believed that respect was the foundation of smooth communication. And in this situation, that foundation had been missing from one side. Still, he held no resentment. He only hoped that things could be solved peacefully. A young traveler, perhaps in his early 20s, walked up to Rahim with hesitant steps. His voice was soft but curious. "Sir, are you okay?" Rahim gave him a reassuring smile. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. I saw what happened," the young man said. "You were very polite. You didn't deserve that." Rahim appreciated the kindness. "These things happen," he replied gently. "The important thing is to remain calm." The young traveler nodded in agreement. Still, the way she spoke, it didn't feel right. Rahim did not comment further. He simply thanked the young man again and watched as he walked back to his seat, still shaking his head quietly. Others around them seemed to share similar thoughts. A few exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unfairness they had witnessed. Back at the counter, the supervisor continued her work, unaware that the simple phone call Rahim had made moments earlier had already begun to reach people far beyond the airport walls. His report had been clear and factual, and it had been received with the seriousness appropriate for someone of his position. In fact, Rahim's colleagues, aware of his calm nature, knew that if he had reached out, the situation must genuinely require attention. While Rahim waited silently, the supervisor attended to more passengers. Her tone remained firm, and although she spoke politely to some, she still carried an air of impatience that made many travelers uncomfortable. She seemed unaware that people were watching her more closely now, their curiosity growing after the earlier incident. The gentle hum of the airport continued, but something subtle had changed. A sense of anticipation lingered in the air. It was as if the scene was quietly building towards something that the passengers couldn't yet see. Rahim kept his eyes lowered, focused on nothing in particular. He had no desire to draw attention or cause any disruption. He simply hoped that someone would review the misunderstanding soon, so the situation could reach a peaceful conclusion. But moments later, things took another turn. A senior staff member from the airline approached the counter. He was a man in his late 40s with a neatly pressed uniform and a friendly face. He spoke briefly to the supervisor, asking about the earlier problem. The supervisor shrugged dismissively, offering only a few words while sounding completely certain of herself. "He didn't have a valid first-class seat," she said confidently, "and he was insisting too much." The senior staff member glanced toward Rahim and then back at the supervisor. "Did you check the reservation carefully?" he asked. "There was no need," she replied quickly. "I could already see that he shouldn't be in first class." The senior staff member's expression shifted slightly, not into anger, but into something more thoughtful. He studied the supervisor, as if trying to understand her reasoning. A few seconds passed in silence before he gently suggested checking the system again. The supervisor resisted at first, but eventually, after noticing the growing interest from waiting passengers, she reluctantly reopened the reservation file. Rahim watched her from a distance, still calm, still hopeful that fairness would guide her actions. But instead of taking her time to carefully examine the details, she tapped the keyboard briefly and closed the screen again. "It's the same," she said. "There is no mistake." A few passengers standing close enough to hear exchanged doubtful looks. Even the senior staff member appeared uncertain. He opened the terminal again himself, typing slower and more thoroughly. But before he could finish reviewing the reservation, a message popped up on his screen. His eyes widened slightly. It wasn't related to the ticket, it was a notification from the airline's headquarters. He read the short message again, his eyebrows slowly lifting. Then he looked toward Rahim with newfound awareness. "Is that him?" he whispered to the supervisor. The supervisor frowned. "Who?" "He's just a regular traveler who wanted a better seat." The senior staff member's face showed surprise and concern. He leaned closer and whispered urgently, but the supervisor only looked confused and slightly irritated. "What's the big deal?" she asked, still unaware of the significance. Before he could explain, another notification popped up on his screen, this one marked urgent. The senior staff member read it with growing seriousness. Then he quickly excused himself and stepped away to make a call, leaving the supervisor puzzled. Meanwhile, Rahim continued waiting quietly. He did not know what was happening behind the scenes, nor did he expect anything unusual. He simply hoped someone would resolve the matter soon so he could continue with his journey. The supervisor, growing uneasy from the sudden shift in atmosphere, glanced around. Passengers who had seen the earlier exchange were still watching her. She didn't like feeling observed and crossed her arms defensively. A woman who had been sitting near Rahim earlier approached the counter and spoke softly to the supervisor. "Maybe you should just check carefully," she suggested kindly. He seemed very polite. The supervisor sighed loudly. "Everyone keeps saying that. But I'm doing my job. There is nothing to check." Her response only made the woman step back with disappointment. As more minutes passed, the airport environment subtly changed again. 2 airport security officers walked toward the gate, not in a forceful way, but with a sense of purpose. Their expressions were calm and respectful. They weren't here to create problems. They were here because someone had called them. Passengers began whispering. The supervisor stiffened slightly when she saw them approach. She straightened her uniform, adjusting her name tag. One of the officers approached Rahim first. "Sir," he said gently, "may we speak with you for a moment?" Rahim nodded, offering a polite smile. "Of course." The officer greeted him respectfully and asked a few simple questions, not to accuse him of anything, but to confirm details. The moment the officer confirmed Rahim's identity, his expression changed to one of deep respect and care. "Thank you, sir," the officer said, speaking with sincere politeness. "Please wait just a little longer. The matter is being handled." The officer then walked to the counter and spoke to the supervisor. His tone was calm and professional. "Miss, we need you to step aside for a moment." The supervisor blinked, surprised. "Why? I'm working." The officer remained composed. "We received an official request related to the situation earlier." She hesitated, confused but suddenly less confident. Passengers leaned forward slightly, sensing that something important was taking place. The senior staff member returned, looking more serious than before. He quietly asked the supervisor to join him away from the counter. She resisted at first but eventually followed, looking puzzled and slightly nervous. Rahim didn't move. He remained calm, unaware that his simple phone call had reached people who were already taking the matter seriously. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary misunderstanding slowly unraveling. But beneath the surface, something larger was beginning to unfold, something driven not by anger, but by fairness, responsibility, and the quiet power of truth. The moment of realization was approaching, though the supervisor still had no idea how deeply her earlier decisions were about to be reviewed. The calmness of the airport slowly began to change as Rahim continued waiting near the gate. He stood quietly, unaware of how far the effects of his single phone call were already spreading. People walked past him with curious glances. Still recalling the earlier scene, they had seen the unfairness. They had seen his patience. And now they saw something else, a strange shift in the atmosphere, like someone had lifted a curtain no one knew existed. Rahim himself did not think about any of that. He simply waited with the same gentle posture, his hands loosely resting at his sides. His mind wandered to his sister, who always prepared his favorite meals whenever he visited. He imagined her excitement and hoped he would still reach her in time for dinner. He had no idea that the simple call he made had already set many things in motion. Inside the airport office, the senior staff member who had stepped away earlier was speaking urgently on the phone. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a mix of concern and respect. He looked at the screen in front of him, reading messages from the airline's headquarters. Every new detail made his expression shift further from confusion to realization. He returned to the gate after a few minutes, walking with a sense of purpose. His eyes immediately found Rahim, and he approached him with a respectful nod. "Sir," he said softly, "thank you for your patience. Please wait just a little longer. Some senior officials are on their way." Rahim nodded calmly. "Certainly, I appreciate your help." The senior staff member stepped aside, but he continued observing the situation closely. He had finally understood who Rahim was, not just a traveler with a ticket issue, but someone with significant responsibility and a reputation for calm leadership. He knew that such people seldom complained unless something genuinely required attention. Meanwhile, the supervisor who had dismissed Rahim earlier still seemed confused. She stood speaking quietly with another staff member. Her arms folded, her expression uncertain. Something in the air had changed, and even she could sense it now, though she didn't yet know what had triggered the shift. Passengers whispered among themselves, curious to see what would happen next. Some had even delayed walking to the boarding area, just so they could stay close enough to witness what was unfolding. They weren't expecting drama, they were just fascinated by the quiet, growing tension that came without raised voices or arguments. Then, something unexpected happened. A group of airline managers approached the gate. They walked quickly, but respectfully, their expressions serious. Their uniforms were crisp, and each of them carried a small tablet or folder. They weren't rushing in a panic. Instead, they moved with deliberate care, as if handling something important. Passengers noticed them immediately. A soft murmur spread through the area, drawing more attention to the scene. The managers gathered near the counter, speaking quietly among themselves. The supervisor looked at them, surprised, and stepped forward hesitantly. "Is something wrong?" she asked, trying to hide her nervousness. One of the managers looked at her kindly but firmly. "We need to review an incident that took place a short while ago." The supervisor blinked. "Incident? I just followed the rules." Another manager gently replied, "We will review everything together." They didn't raise their voices or scold her. Their calmness only made the moment feel more serious. While the managers began their quiet review, another shift occurred deeper inside the airport. The airport's head of security had received the same report that had reached the airline's headquarters earlier. He didn't know Rahim personally, but he knew of the Royal Guard's reputation, especially the values they were known for: discipline, fairness, respect, and responsibility. So when he heard that a member of the Royal Guard had reported an issue, he knew it should be handled with professionalism and sincerity. He walked toward the gate quickly but respectfully, accompanied by a couple of senior officers. His presence caused another ripple through the passengers. They straightened in their seats. Some whispered, "Who is that?" Others simply watched with wide eyes. When the head of security approached Rahim, his expression softened with respect. "Sir," he said politely, "thank you for your patience. We apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced. Please allow us a few more moments to resolve everything properly." Rahim gave a gentle nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your efforts." His calm demeanor impressed the head of security. Many people in such a situation might have been upset or demanding, but Rahim remained composed, which only increased the seriousness with which everyone treated the situation. Meanwhile, the manager at the counter accessed the reservation system properly, reviewing each line of information carefully. Within seconds, he found the truth. Rahim's first-class seat was not only confirmed, but the reservation had been flagged as priority due to his official travel status. Nothing was wrong with the booking. Everything had been correct from the beginning. He looked at the supervisor with a subtle expression of disappointment, not harsh, just deeply concerned. "It appears the reservation was always valid," he said quietly. "There was no system error." The supervisor's eyes widened. "But it didn't look right when I checked," the manager replied gently. "You may have overlooked the details." Passengers around them exchanged meaningful glances. Some whispered softly, "We knew it." The manager then walked over to Rahim, accompanied by the head of security and two other senior officials. Together, they approached him with sincere respect. "Sir," the manager said with a calm and humble tone, "we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. Your reservation is fully confirmed, and a first-class seat is ready for you. We will escort you personally." Rahim bowed his head slightly. "Thank you. I appreciate your help." He did not ask for explanations. He did not demand anything. His peaceful reaction only made the staff feel more responsible for fixing the situation properly. But the matter was not yet over. As the managers escorted Rahim toward a private lounge, more messages began arriving on their devices. The airline's headquarters had opened an official review not because Rahim asked for it, but because protocol required it. Whenever a Royal Guard member reported an issue involving dignity or fairness, it was taken seriously to ensure that everyone was treated respectfully. The supervisor watched all of this unfold with growing realization. She didn't appear scared, only confused, and slightly regretful. She finally understood that her earlier assumptions had been mistaken, and that she should have taken the time to check things more carefully. Passengers watched as Rahim was led to the private lounge. Many of them felt relieved that the situation was being corrected. Some even clapped softly, not loudly, just enough to show appreciation for the fairness being restored. Once inside the lounge, Rahim was offered water, refreshments, and a comfortable seat. But he accepted only a glass of water, thanking the staff quietly. He didn't like creating inconvenience for others, and he preferred simplicity over attention. As he waited in the lounge, another call was made, not by him this time, but by the managers and airport officials. They were reporting everything that had happened, so the situation could be handled responsibly. It wasn't about blame. It was about ensuring fairness for all travelers in the future. Outside, passengers continued whispering about what they had witnessed. Some admired Rahim's patience. Others were impressed by how respectfully the officials treated him, and some simply hoped that the airline would learn something valuable from the incident. Rahim didn't think of himself as someone special. He simply believed in staying calm and letting the truth speak for itself. But little did he know, the situation was far from over. In fact, the real consequences of the incident were only beginning to unfold quietly, carefully, and with far-reaching effects that neither he nor anyone else in the lounge could have imagined. The private lounge where Rahim waited was calm and quiet, a gentle contrast to the busy hall just outside. Soft lights glowed overhead, and comfortable chairs lined the room. A server brought him tea, and Rahim thanked him with his usual warm politeness. Although everything around him was peaceful, the situation outside was changing fast, much faster than anyone inside the lounge could see. At the gate, the managers were still gathered around the counter. Their expressions were serious as they reviewed messages from their headquarters. None of them raised their voices. Their tone remained professional, but their concern was clear. What had begun as a small misunderstanding was now being reviewed at the highest level of the airline. The supervisor who had denied Rahim's boarding earlier stood a short distance away. Her arms were no longer folded, and her expression had shifted from confidence to uncertainty. She kept glancing toward the managers, trying to understand what was happening. One of her colleagues walked over to comfort her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I didn't know," she murmured. "I thought he just wanted to get a better seat." "Ha," her colleague responded gently. "Maybe checking more carefully would have helped." The supervisor sighed, her face thoughtful. "I should have. But I was sure the system was right." She wasn't defensive anymore. She genuinely seemed to regret her earlier behavior. She had not expected the situation to grow this serious. She looked toward the lounge, wondering how the traveler she had dismissed remained so calm through everything. In another part of the airport, a group of authorities were assembling. These were officials from the National Aviation Body, responsible for ensuring fair treatment of passengers. They had received the report that Rahim had submitted, and although they approached the matter with care, they understood the importance of reviewing it thoroughly. The head of this group, a thoughtful man with years of experience, spoke quietly to his team. "Remember," he said, "our job is not to find fault. Our job is to understand what happened and make sure every passenger is treated with respect." They nodded, each of them preparing to observe the situation with fairness. They were not here to blame. They were here to ensure the rules were followed and dignity was maintained. When they reached the gate, the airline managers greeted them respectfully. The passengers nearby watched attentively, wondering what was happening but keeping a respectful distance. One of the officials asked to speak with the supervisor privately. She followed them with a nervous expression. Inside a small meeting area, they spoke gently with her, asking her to explain exactly what she had seen during her interaction with Rahim. At first, she hesitated, but then she spoke honestly. "I thought there was a mistake. I didn't think he had a real first-class reservation, and when he asked for a manager, I thought he was being difficult." The officials listened carefully, taking notes. They didn't interrupt her, nor did they judge her. When she finished, one of them asked quietly, "Did you check the reservation properly?" The supervisor looked down. "No, I only looked quickly." Another official asked, "Why didn't you ask someone else to help?" She replied softly, "I didn't think it was necessary." The officials nodded. They didn't scold her or make her feel embarrassed. Their purpose was to understand, not to blame. But as they listened, they realized that this was not just a single mistake. It was part of a larger pattern, one they had been monitoring across several airlines. Moments like this showed why fair training and awareness were important. Outside the room, the airline managers continued coordinating, sending updates to headquarters. They were concerned, not just because of the mistake, but because they wanted to demonstrate responsibility. The airline had faced a few complaints recently about customer service, and they knew they needed to improve. While all of this took place, passengers remained quietly interested in what they had witnessed earlier. Some felt relieved that the matter was being reviewed seriously. Others admired how calmly Rahim had handled the entire situation. One older passenger commented softly to another, "This is how real dignity looks, calm and patient, even when things go wrong." In the lounge, Rahim finished his tea and sat quietly, unaware of the detailed investigation taking place outside. He didn't expect anyone to get in trouble. He only hoped the matter would be resolved fairly, so everyone could continue their work with clarity and understanding. After some time, the head of airport security entered the lounge. He greeted Rahim with a respectful smile and sat nearby. "Sir," he said gently, "thank you again for your patience. The situation is being reviewed at multiple levels. We want to assure you that everything will be handled with professionalism." Rahim nodded politely. "Thank you. I appreciate the effort." The security head continued, "You handled the matter with remarkable calmness. Many people would have become upset." "Well," Rahim smiled softly, "calmness helps everyone. It allows things to be solved peacefully." The security head admired his response. "Your words are wise, sir." Outside the lounge, momentum continued to build. The national aviation officials finished speaking with the supervisor and requested to view the reservation system logs. They analyzed the timestamps, details, and available seats. Everything confirmed that Rahim's booking was correct. One of the officials stood back and said quietly to the airline managers, "This is not just a simple error. There are several things we need to review." The managers nodded solemnly. They too understood that this was more than a small mistake. Soon after, a representative from the airline's headquarters arrived at the airport. His presence showed the seriousness of the matter. He met with the managers and the aviation officials, discussing how to ensure such incidents did not happen again. "We value every passenger," he said, "and it is important that our staff understand the responsibility they carry. This situation must be reviewed thoroughly." Meanwhile, the supervisor sat quietly in a separate area. She knew she had made a mistake, but she also hoped for a chance to improve and learn from the incident. One of her colleagues comforted her, saying softly, "This isn't the end. It's a chance to grow." As the review continued, the airline realized something important. This was not just about Rahim. It was about their systems, their training, their communication, and the way passengers were treated. They needed to take meaningful steps toward improvement. Soon, the aviation officials announced a temporary measure. The airline's operations would be paused for a detailed review. Not because of punishment, but because fairness and safety required careful evaluation. News spread through the airport quietly. Passengers heard discussions about an official review and temporary pause. And people began to understand that something significant was happening. The review team wanted to ensure everything from booking systems to staff training met proper standards. The decision wasn't made lightly. It was made to protect passengers and restore trust. Inside the lounge, Rahim was informed gently by the airline representative. "Sir," he said respectfully, "we wanted you to know that the airline is temporarily halting operations for a full review. This is being done to ensure fairness, transparency, and improvement." Rahim looked thoughtful. "I hope it leads to better service for everyone." The representative smiled softly. "That is our goal." Passengers reacted with different emotions. Some were surprised, some were curious, and some felt relieved that fairness was being taken seriously. The story slowly spread across the airport, not as gossip, but as an example of how calmness, respect, and responsibility could inspire important changes. And yet, what the world outside didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The review would uncover more than expected, and the consequences would reach much farther than anyone imagined. The sun outside the airport had begun to lower gently, casting long golden shadows through the wide glass windows. Inside the private lounge, Rahim sat quietly, unaware that the situation involving the airline had grown much larger than anyone originally expected. He had not asked for any special treatment. He had not raised his voice, argued, or demanded anything. He simply believed in doing things the right way, and somehow, his calm response had encouraged everyone else to do the same. He finished the last sip of water from the glass on the table beside him and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The peaceful atmosphere helped him relax. He thought of his sister again and wondered whether she knew he would be late. She had a habit of worrying too much, and he smiled softly at the thought. Meanwhile, outside the lounge, airport and aviation authorities continued reviewing the airline's operations. Their work was slow, careful, and detailed. They spoke quietly among themselves, checking documents, procedures, training materials, and system logs. They wanted to make sure that what happened to Rahim could not happen to anyone else. One of the officials, a woman known for her fairness and kindness, said softly to her team, "Every traveler deserves respect. Every reservation deserves accurate checking. This is how we keep trust." Her words guided the tone of the entire investigation. The officials were not looking for fault, they were looking for improvement. As the review progressed, the airline discovered several areas where they needed to strengthen their staff training. Some employees needed clearer instructions, some systems needed updates, and some procedures needed more careful communication. The airline's headquarters issued a simple message to the review team: "Make the process better. Help us understand what needs to change." Inside the lounge, Rahim was approached once again by the head of airport security. His expression carried calm respect. "Sir," he said gently, "we wanted to share an update with you. The review is almost complete." Rahim nodded with a warm smile. "Thank you for letting me know. I hope everything is resolved peacefully." The security head admired his perspective. "Your patience has made it easier for everyone, sir. Many people would have reacted differently," Rahim replied softly. "Sometimes calmness brings clarity." Outside, the supervisor who had initially denied Rahim's seat sat with a member of the airline's management team. Her posture was humble. She wasn't upset with anyone, but rather disappointed in herself. She had realized how a few moments of impatience could change the experience of a traveler. The manager spoke kindly to her. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." The supervisor nodded. "I understand. I want to do better." The manager gave her an encouraging smile. "That is the first step." Meanwhile, the national aviation officials had completed their findings. The airline's temporary pause was extended just long enough to ensure that every necessary improvement would be implemented, not as punishment, but as a step toward growth. The officials prepared a report and met with the airline representatives one last time before finalizing their recommendations. One of the lead officials summarized the conclusion clearly and calmly. "Our purpose is not to shut down an airline permanently. Our purpose is to ensure that every traveler, no matter who they are, is treated with fairness, clarity, and respect." In this particular incident, the calmness and dignity of the passenger helped reveal areas that need improvement. The airline representatives agreed wholeheartedly. They wanted to rebuild trust, and they were prepared to make real changes. Later that afternoon, a small group of senior airline leaders walked toward the private lounge. They were there not just out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. When they reached the room, they entered quietly and greeted Rahim with warm, polite smiles. "Sir," the highest-ranking representative said, "we are deeply grateful for your patience today. We would like to offer our sincere apology for the misunderstanding and the inconvenience you experienced." Rahim stood respectfully and nodded. "Thank you for saying that. I believe the situation will lead to improvement for everyone." The representative continued, Your calm response helped many people reflect on their responsibilities. We appreciate your example. Rahim replied humbly, I only wished for fairness. Nothing more. The airline leaders exchanged a look of respect. It was clear to them that Rahim was not someone who sought attention or special treatment. He simply believed in doing what was right. They then offered to escort him personally to a special transportation arrangement. Since the airline's operations were paused for review, they arranged a private charter flight to ensure he could continue his journey without further delay. Rahim looked surprised. That is not necessary, he said kindly. I do not need anything special. But the representative responded with sincerity. Sir, we want to honor your patience and ensure your comfort. Please accept this arrangement as a gesture of respect. Rahim paused for a moment, then nodded gently. Thank you. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. The staff guided him from the lounge through a quiet hallway, away from the crowds. Along the way, several passengers who had witnessed the earlier scene saw him passing by. Some gave him small, polite smiles. Others nodded in admiration. Rahim nodded back with equal kindness. At the private boarding area, the pilot himself greeted Rahim. Sir, he said warmly, it is my honor to welcome you aboard. Rahim shook his hand politely. Thank you. I look forward to a peaceful flight. As he stepped aboard the small, comfortable aircraft, Rahim felt a sense of gratitude, not for the special arrangements, but for the fact that everything had been handled with dignity, fairness, and calm communication. He believed that when people worked together respectfully, solutions appeared naturally. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the aviation officials finalized their recommendations, and the airline prepared for a full operational restart, with improved guidelines, better staff support, and updated training programs. They wanted to build a future where no traveler would face confusion or unfair treatment. Weeks later, the news quietly mentioned the story, not focusing on Rahim's identity, but on the value of respect. The incident became an example in staff training programs worldwide, teaching workers the importance of patience, careful checking, and kind communication. People shared the story as a reminder. A calm heart can change the direction of an entire situation. For Rahim, life continued peacefully. He returned to his Royal Guard duties with his usual quiet dedication. He never told anyone the full story unless they asked, and even then, he spoke only of the importance of fairness and kindness. His sister welcomed him warmly when he arrived that day, teasing him gently for being late. They laughed together over dinner, and Rahim felt grateful that the day had ended on a peaceful note. The airline, on the other hand, transformed into a better version of itself. Their improved service earned them praise from travelers. Staff members felt more confident in their roles, knowing they had the training and support they needed to treat everyone with care. The supervisor who had made the mistake used the experience as motivation to grow, eventually becoming known for her renewed dedication to fairness. And though Rahim never sought attention for what happened, many people in the aviation world remembered his calmness as a turning point. In the end, the story was not about power, authority, or correction. It was about respect. It was about how a gentle response can encourage others to reflect, improve, and grow. And most importantly, it was about how kindness, quiet, steady, and sincere, can reshape an entire system without raising a single voice.